Welcome back to Reading Bear. Today, we will take a look at some new malicious compliance stories. And if you enjoyed my content, please don't forget to subscribe to my channel and post some bear emojis in the comments. Let's go!
The first story is titled Must Find the Reservation. Okay, last week me and my friend went out to eat for the first time in 3+ months. There was a short line before being seated, just one other couple before us. The man insisted that he had a reservation, but the waitress couldn't find his name in her tablet and immediately he got loud and angry. The waitress suggested that maybe the man had called the wrong number, because there is another restaurant 50 kilometers from here with the same name and sometimes people mix up the two of them when doing a Google search. She was very polite and calm about it, but the man got even angrier and accused her of trying to shift the blame, said she couldn't do her job, blah blah. The waitress tried to say that they still had some open tables and if he could wait a moment she would go and check, but the man kept speaking loudly over her and saying that she must find his reservation. So eventually the waitress called the owner, and the owner took the man and his companion to one side so they wouldn't block the line while she tried to figure out what was going on. Now, me and my friend didn't have a reservation either, because I'm a total scatterbrain and I forgot to call ahead. I told the waitress as much and asked if there was any chance they'd be able to fit us in. She told me not to worry, there were still tables available, and we were seated within a minute. Our table was not near the entrance so we didn't see what happened next, but the same waitress brought us our coffees at the end of dinner so we asked her if everything was okay. Me and my friend had been talking about it and we were appalled at the man's behavior. The waitress told us not to worry, that the owner had let him stew for a bit and then she'd called the other restaurant with the same name. The manager of that other restaurant had confirmed they had a reservation under his name. The man was very annoyed at being proved wrong, and asked to be seated since they had been waiting a long time. The owner said that unfortunately all tables were full. Man, but earlier you had empty tables, I saw it. Owner, yes, but you told the staff you didn't want to be seated, you wanted us to find your reservation. We have found your reservation, it's for a restaurant in another city. In the meantime, other people have come in and all the tables are full. We have no seats left. The man didn't take it well, but the bartender, a huge giant of a man, was standing nearby so he scampered off in rage, swearing he was never coming back. I think everyone in that restaurant will be happy if he keeps that promise. The next story is titled, Demand We Have a Meeting for This? Okay, I once had a project manager named Shirley and a coworker named Alex. I was a computer programmer. Every morning we, along with half a dozen other people, had a 5-minute long meeting to discuss our progress and give people a chance to ask each other stuff. The boss was away on a 2-week vacation, and while he was away the meetings were slightly more important so we could coordinate ourselves without him to do it. Right before the meeting I had come to a roadblock because I could remember what something in the programming was called. I just needed an actual word and I could continue, and I knew Alex would know it. At the meeting Alex did his thing, a few other people talked, then it was my turn. I explained what I had done yesterday and what I was working on and said, "Hey Alex, do you remember?" At this point Shirley interrupted and threw a screaming fit at me. How dare I try to have a discussion with someone without her? I pointed out that she was standing right there, and she demanded to know how dare I try to talk to someone without it being a scheduled meeting in the conference room in her presence? I pointed out that this was a scheduled meeting, we were in the conference room, and we were in her presence. How dare I presume to ask anyone anything without notifying her in advance that I would be doing so? I tried to explain that it was only a very brief question, and she flipped out that how dare I try to talk back to her about this? So, having gotten an idea, I asked when we could have this meeting. She said 3 p.m. I knew damned well she had nothing to do before then, she just wanted to have something she could feel smug about. It was 9:34 a.m. at the time. She ordered that I was not to discuss it with anyone before the meeting and I was not to proceed on the task without it or I'd just be proving it wasn't actually important and I was wasting anyone's time. The meeting ended and we left. Alex worked about 10 feet away from me, so I could have just walked over and asked him, but I didn't. He sent me an instant message to know if I wanted to ask him whatever while she couldn't hear, and I replied that no, she wanted to be rude about it so she could reap the rewards of her actions. Alex and I had lunch every day, but I declined to talk about it. He knew I was up to something. At 3 p.m. he and I went into the conference room. 10 minutes later she swanned in, closed the door, sat down, opened her notebook, uncapped her pen, wrote down the date and time and who was there, and told me I was now authorized to proceed. "Hey Alex, do you remember last week when we did task, you used a thingy that did thing, what was it called?" He told me. "Great, thanks," and he and I both turned to leave. It had taken all of about 20 seconds. Shirley flew into a rage. I was deliberately making a mockery of her by scheduling a meeting for something that would take 20 seconds. As I left the room I said, "Shirley, I warned you that this was a 1-minute exchange, but you insisted on a meeting." She didn't speak to me for the rest of the day. I made sure my timesheet reflected that I spent 9:35 to 3 p.m. doing nothing, waiting for Shirley. A day or two later she flew into a rage at me again, and the entire staff was so enraged they told me they were quitting and asked me to join them. I asked them to wait a couple days, called my boss and told him, and on the next business day I found he had returned early from his vacation and fired her. The next story is titled, "Company Policy Costs Company a Lot." In 1979, my dad's company transferred him to Mexico City from Toronto. We flew down in early December and moved into a hotel, good hotel in the city. Our furniture was supposed to arrive in a week or so, and then we would move into the house that the company was renting for us. It did. Except we found out that it was going to be stuck in customs for an indeterminate amount of time. My dad asked his company if they would let him expense some basic living gear for the house. Cookware, plates, a few beds, just enough to get us out of the hotel and into the house. The company said no, policy was that we were to be in a hotel until the furniture arrived, not to buy us furniture or housewares. My dad noted that the policy didn't say what hotel we had to stay in. So we moved out of the individual rooms of the hotel we were in, and moved into one of the presidential suites at a 5-star hotel, Hotel Camino Real. We had 2 floors, and a private swimming pool. The hotel put a Christmas tree in our living room. In 1979, the suite was around $400 per day. I have no idea what it is in today's money. We ate out at really nice restaurants. We got tired of steak and lobster. In all, we were in the hotel for 39 days, before we got our belongings out of customs. The hotel bill was somewhere around $14,000. The next story is titled, "How many bugs will your code have?" I'm a software developer. I write software. Our software testers test the software that I write. When they find a bug, they write a bug report, and I fix the bug. Simple, right? Management likes to plan things, and that's fine. They like to measure productivity, which is also fine, provided the measurement makes sense. They chose a measurement that doesn't make sense. They decided that during planning, developers need to estimate how many bugs there will be in our code. The measurement would be, if the tester found significantly fewer bugs than the estimate, then they must not be testing effectively. If they found significantly more bugs than the estimate, then we must be doing a bad job writing code. You can probably see the flaw here. A software developer strives to write code without bugs. We don't often succeed, but we try. While it's likely that a very complex system will have more bugs than a simple one, this is a broad approximation, and not the sort of thing you can use to meaningfully measure productivity. Since the software developers and the software testers are all professionals who strive to produce a good product, we decided to comply in the laziest way possible. Everybody knew the estimated number of bugs from planning, so it was easy enough for the testers to see if they were going to go above or below that number. If they were finding a lot of bugs, they wouldn't write all of them up, and instead would talk to the developers directly. If they weren't finding enough bugs, they'd start nitpicking for the tiniest of things, and if that wasn't enough, the developers might accidentally check in new, easy-to-fix bugs while fixing other bugs. In this way, everyone met their numbers, and management got to pretend they were doing something useful. It was stupid, but sometimes it's easier to comply with a stupid decision than it is to talk sense to the decision maker. The next story is titled, "Reason Required to Move Out." This happened a long time ago. I was young and had just come back from traveling in Europe. I wound up renting an apartment that I was not happy with, but it was in my hometown, and was affordable. I was hoping to move out, and was able to do so once a better opportunity came along. The apartment was generally depressing, so I was looking forward to moving out. I talked to the landlord and building manager about moving out, and to see if I could move out mid-month to save on some rent. They said that was not possible, and I would have to wait until the end of the month to move out. Fine, not a big problem. The building manager says I need to fill out some forms before I can move out, so I go to his office and do so. He was not a very friendly guy, but honestly I had not had any interactions with him prior to this, and had no hard feelings about him. One of the questions on the form was, "Why are you moving out?" I left it blank. What business is it of anyone's why I am moving out? The building manager handed me back the form and said, "You have to fill this in." I told him that I didn't feel like giving a reason that I am moving out, and didn't understand why it was mandatory. He insisted that I had to fill it in or he would not process my move-out paperwork to end the month-to-month lease. I said okay fine, and filled in, "I do not like the building manager." He was shocked when he read it. I told him I didn't want to put anything down, but rules are rules. The next story is titled, "Deliver Tomorrow?" Okay. At a previous job, without getting into detail, we stored important items for different businesses. When they needed any of these, they sent through a request, and provided it was before 4 p.m. we delivered it the next day. There was an unspoken understanding that if it was a large order, they would put it through early to give us plenty of time to deliver it. Until one day, one of our bigger, red entitled, clients decided they needed 100 boxes delivered the next day. A friendly phone call to them was unsuccessful. Basically they told us it was in before 4, they need it tomorrow. I spoke to my boss and we came to an agreement. Next day I sent my drivers to do the rest of the run, while I picked the order. I then loaded it into a spare van and continued with the rest of my work. 3 p.m. comes and I let my boss know I'm taking the van home. He smiles, says see you tomorrow, and I'm off. 3:30 I arrive at the clients to them in a panic, thinking I'm not coming, and they close at 4. When they ask why I'm there so late, I merely responded, "We got them here next day, didn't we?" After they had to stay late to help unload everything, to their credit they apologized and never pulled that stunt again. The next story is titled, "Foreman in the Way." About 5 years ago I was working as an assembler in a cabinet shop. I would take parts cut on a CNC and put them together for shipping. Occasionally there would be questions as to how those parts were intended to fit, or there was an error with the part itself. No problem, the designers were through a door 10 feet away from my workstation, and I could ask a quick question and be back to work within a few minutes. My shop foreman, however, wanted all information to flow through him. On paper, this seems reasonable, as he just wanted to know exactly what was happening on the shop floor. Practically, it was a dumb idea. If an issue occurred, I would have to go hunt him down, and wait if he was busy. Then, I would have to explain the issue. If it was a design conflict, I would have to run through 5 to 10 minutes of explanation just so he'd understand what was wrong, then another 5 explaining what I needed him to ask the designers. Usually, I would circumvent him and just ask my question, but I was eventually reprimanded. Cue the MC. If I had an issue, I'd immediately note the time on my time card and go looking for the foreman, run through the whole shebang, and then sit down on my bench and wait. I would do absolutely nothing while waiting for him to try and translate my issue and then understand the explanation. He would come back, irritated, and ask why I'm sitting around, and I'd just say, well, I needed that question answered before I could move on. I didn't want to clear my workstation off just to spend 5 minutes on something else. That would be a waste of time. Once I was back on track, I'd fill in the downtime on my time card. FYI, employers don't like seeing chunks of a workday allotted to waiting for an answer. This is especially true when the majority of the answers he came back with made no sense, and he'd send me forward to ask myself anyways. In the end, they just asked us to keep him in the loop after getting our issues sorted and to deal with the asking ourselves. The next story is titled, "Your Wish is My Command, Boss." I used to work at a bakery for a lady who I am still friends with, although she used to occasionally become unreasonable and yell at her employees. You know that employee at your job who works super hard and isn't really recognized for it or paid well enough? You know, the sort of person who would rather do a task to get it done right even if it's someone else's job. Well, that person at the bakery was me. I was the opening supervisor, which just meant that I had to keep everyone on track until my boss got there at 6 or 7 a.m. and my coworker who was with me in the early mornings was not super good at her job, to say the least. This resulted in me doing all of my work and roughly 30% of her work. I had told my boss this, but she had not addressed my coworker yet, and one busy day we were slammed. I mean, we usually made 2 or 3 dozen cinnamon rolls a day, but this day we made 24 and sold them all. As a result, we were behind with several tasks despite our best efforts. When my boss came in, she ripped into us about not getting everything done. I tried to explain how busy we had been, but she interrupted me and said, if everyone would just do their jobs, it would be fine. Oh, you think so? Very well, boss. Your wish is my command. The next insanely busy day, I bustled around doing my job, just my job. All the things my less competent coworker was struggling with, I let her figure out, and when our boss got in, she was furious. I calmly went about my work while she dumbfoundedly pitched in and tried to do damage control. She was pitching quietly to her daughter about the state of everything and why I didn't do more, when her daughter, bless her, said, "Mum, Op actually did all of her tasks." It's coworker who struggled today, and my boss eventually conceded that perhaps more training was in order. The next story is titled, Clean the Fryer Just Before Friday Night Rush? Yes, ma'am. Quick setup. As my current job begins to start back operation, memory brought me back to my previous years as a long-suffering line cook. For those of you who have worked this job, you know it is simultaneously the best and worst job in the world. The people are great, but if it wasn't for the low pay, long hours, working conditions, stress. Anyway, I was in management training at this time, and this was used constantly to coerce me into doing many downright dangerous things, such as in this story. But this time it bit them in the rear. This is not exact as it was a few years ago, so exact times may be off and words not correct, but it's as close as I can remember and will happily answer questions for clarification when I can. The story. On this particular Friday, I was working what we called salad side, which meant I was in control of the salads, pizza oven, and fryer. While it could be a lot to juggle during busy hours, I had managed to get into a pretty good groove through the morning shift. With no orders in the window, no tables on the floor but a bar regular, the day's prep all finished, and the area cleaned and restocked, I was looking at a good 30 minutes break between my shifts. We didn't get one scheduled, nor were you guaranteed a meal on a double shift, you only got one if you finished on time. I figured that I, for once, had a good chance at a break. After checking with the other line cook on duty, I let the general manager or GM know I was ready to go on break and to check my part of the kitchen. From now on she will be referred to as Lazy Daisy because that is what she was, lazy. She is the source of many terrible events in this building, and her nickname used here comes from these. She walks and immediately goes to the deep fryer, which had been forgotten about by the previous night's crew as is tradition. Lazy Daisy, why hasn't this been cleaned out? Me, because it's in the middle of the day, we can only clean it out at the end of the night shift, and the night cook didn't do it last night like it is scheduled. I can do it after close tonight though. The oil was too viscous in the morning when I arrived, and the sickly pump could not cycle the thick oil through the gun trap properly. Therefore, the oil must be heated up first, but it has to be allowed to cool down enough to safety cycle the oil. Even if we tried anyway, the time spent cleaning the fryer prevented a lot of essential prep work to be done before opening, and then you had to hope the fryer would be ready before opening. While this may not be a problem with some fryers, this old girl has seen better days and took forever to get started. Often the opening manager coming in at 8 AM had to turn it on to make sure it was alive for the 11 AM open. The current roster managers usually refused to allow it to be taken offline during normal hours as they didn't want to have to deal with the "but my nuggets" problems, so I didn't think to come to her about it. No idea what possessed her to want it done now of all times. Lazy Daisy, quit being lazy and swap out the oil and clean this fryer out. It's disgusting. This is not the attitude I want in future management. Me, and good future management would know not to change out fryer oil that is currently sitting at almost 400 degrees Fahrenheit. 200 C, I could lose a hand doing that. It will take a while to cool and clean. Lazy Daisy, if you don't change the oil and clean it up right now, I will have a talk with area director and discuss this promotion of yours. She then proceeded to strut back to the office to ignore her job and eat her lunch. This was doubly insulting as I not have a chance to have my own lunch now. I sat there for a moment, kind of just seething, until the other line cook came over and said, "Don't. It's no safe. Mucho caliente." I nodded in agreement, trying to figure out what to do. I have ignored her in the past on these kinds of things, but it never ended up with me on top. We stood there for a moment silently trying to figure out what to do. He was a good man and very concerned for my safety and was adamant I not even try since I had a bit of an injury reputation. That's when light bulbs popped up in my head. Oh, I'll make sure the fryer is clean alright, and I'll make sure that oil is replaced. Me, you know, the rush starts in not too long. And since my night shift starts in a few minutes, no need to it quick. The other line cook stood there for a moment looking at me like I was crazy, then smiled, eyes closed, shaking his head at me as if to say, "You are an idiot and you are gonna hurt yourself." He then shouted out, "Heard. Servers, 86 fried." Him letting the servers know we couldn't do fried items. I put no effort into doing the next steps swiftly. I cut the heat, then headed out to the back dock and grabbed this metal tube on wheels we used to transport the old grease. While the grease typically was not insanely hot when transporting it out, it was still at a mean temperature and needed a lot of precautions as it would quickly heat up the metal. I won't bore you with the steps required of changing and cycling grease, but know that several times hot speckles of oil popped onto my face and arms. It was painful, but I knew this sacrifice will be worth it. As I am perfecting the art of gunk poking, several tables walked into the door, including a 12-top, 12-person table of mostly little kids. I was able to see them because the majority of the kitchen was visible from the dining room and vice versa because of the open concept design of the restaurant. The server whose section it was groaned because night shift was still several minutes away from arriving and she hadn't even finished looking at her snaps. Oh, how fortuitous. Lazy Daisy began to stir in her office, so I knew I had to rush this next step. I pulled the gunk trap out, slid in the wheeled grease tube, and began to drain, making extra sure the flow wasn't strong enough to splash and burn my feet off. Since it was only a 2-slot fryer, this happened very quickly. Just quickly enough that she arrived as the last drop went into the tube. The distant childish chorus calling out, "I want cheese sticks," could be heard in the background. Lazy Daisy, what is taking so long? We have customers now and the grease isn't swapped out, why did you waste so much time cleaning? I simply shrugged as the night shift began to walk in. It takes time to clean it out with it being so hot. I had to be extra careful. You demanded I clean it and I haven't even had time to wipe it with the towel yet. But it's still too hot. I would need to wait. I wasn't lying, the metal was still extremely hot and she knew that. As if on cue, I heard a ticket print and despite my pretty bad eyesight, I could see plain as day what was on the ticket. 3 orders of the best mozzarella sticks this side of the balconies. I guess the server was too busy playing on her phone to hear the other line cook call 86. Oh well, that is not my problem. Lazy Daisy turned and looked at the ticket, then gave me a death glare. How long? I shrugged again. Usually takes a bit, the left fryer is still acting up but I can crank up the right. Still gonna take a bit with the new grease. Lazy Daisy puts her hand to her forehead frustrated. Just put the old grease back in. Because of the rapidly rising heat of the wheeled grease tube and lack of hand grips besides the one next to the opening, and the significant number of obstacles in the cramped kitchen, it was now impossible to put the grease back in without severe risk to anyone nearby, and she knew that. Me, no can do, if I try the grease will be spilling everywhere and I will probably have to go to the hospital if I try. Even if it doesn't spill, I will still have burned hands. And do you really want all these guests seeing me pour grease from this dirty, grease-encrusted tube? Lazy Daisy had this look of absolute defeat and she marched over to deal with the table as I dumped the cold, thick new grease into the fryer, then poured the old grease into the grease bin on the back dock. The fallout. The left fryer took forever to heat back up and wasn't ready until well after the rush was in full swing. The right side was much quicker but still took quite a while anyway. Aging and broken equipment was common in this building and commercial grease fryers are not often prized for their turn-on speed. The parents of the little kid army were complete and total Karens and began shouting obscenities at Lazy Daisy which could easily be heard over the growing bustle of the restaurant and the snickering of the line cooks. The other morning line cook even found an excuse to stay a few extra minutes to watch before he headed out for the night. Lazy Daisy then spent a good part of the night going from table to table explaining that there were no fried items, as servers never pay attention to any 86 call no matter how many times it is repeated. And as a current server, I admit to doing this far too often to be this judgmental. This only infuriated and stressed her out even more. Once the right side fryer had finally heated up, she spent even more of the night explaining why all the chicken palms, eggplant palms, nuggets, wings, fries, mozz sticks, etc. were running so far behind. After all, we only had half the usual frying capacity. She ended up having to buy a lot of food for the tables and stay late to put out fires, as the other manager, Lucy, was terrible with tables. All of which was in perfect view of me. Thank you, Open Concept Kitchen. After close, I got a stern talking to from Lazy Daisy and Lucy, but they knew I had won this round and knew that Lazy Daisy was the one who demanded I clean the fryer so soon before the night began. I never ended up eating lunch that day, but before I turned off the fryer for the night, I made sure to sneak out with one quick item, a batch of 5 delicious mozzarella sticks. If you enjoyed the video, please subscribe to the channel and post some bear emojis in the comment.